The next morning, I woke up early and prepared breakfast before anyone else had stirred. The quietness of the house felt heavy, like a storm was about to break. I knew something wasn't right. The way my daughter-in-law's mother had looked at me the previous evening, whispering to her relatives with a smirk, it wasn't just casual talk. I placed the dishes gently on the table, trying to ignore the faint murmurs coming from the living room. My daughter-in-law Priya was still asleep upstairs, while her mother and sister sat with tea, speaking in low tones. I couldn't catch every word, but I heard enough to understand. She dresses so simple, probably can't even afford a proper sari, her sister said with a soft laugh. And imagine her son married into our family. How unfortunate for Priya, her mother added, sipping her tea. I froze in the kitchen doorway. Their words cut deep, but I forced a calm smile when I stepped out to greet them. Good morning, I said, keeping my voice soft. Oh, good morning, her mother replied, her tone suddenly sugary sweet. You're up so early. You didn't have to bother with the cooking. We have servants for that. I smiled politely. Oh, I don't mind. I like starting my day this way. She looked at me as if studying an insect under glass, her lips curling slightly. Such habits, well, they suit simple people. I pretended not to notice the insult. I'd lived long enough to know that silence can be more powerful than anger. When Priya came down later, she smiled at me, unaware of the whispers. Ma, you made breakfast already? You're amazing, she said warmly. Her mother's expression tightened for a moment. You should tell your husband to hire a cook for her, she said sharply. She's not here to do servant's work. Priya frowned. Ma, please, she's my family now. I appreciated her words, but I could feel tension thick in the air. I excused myself and went to the garden, pretending to water the plants. My hands trembled slightly. I wasn't hurt by their words. I was only disappointed. They had already judged me without knowing who I really was. But deep down, I reminded myself of my purpose. I was here to see who truly respected my son's choice, who could see beyond wealth and appearances. And now I was seeing their true colors one by one. Later that afternoon, while everyone was busy preparing for a family dinner, I quietly observed. Priya's mother took every opportunity to hint that her daughter had married below her standard. She spoke proudly about her social circle, her family's status, and how difficult it had been to accept a match from a middle-class background. Each time she said those words, I could see my son's discomfort. He tried to stay polite, but his jaw tightened slightly. Priya noticed it too. During dinner, her mother laughed loudly, telling a story about one of her elite friends. You know, people like us, we value sophistication, she said, glancing directly at me. It's not something money can buy. I met her eyes calmly. You're right, I said softly. Sophistication doesn't come from money, it comes from upbringing. For a brief moment, the table went silent. Then Priya's sister coughed awkwardly, changing the topic. After dinner, I went to my room. Alone in the quiet, I smiled to myself. Every word, every glance was revealing exactly what I needed to know. I had come here pretending to be poor and naive, but that disguise was showing me the truth about people who valued appearance more than heart. Before I turned off the light, I looked at an old photo of my husband, a man who had built an empire from nothing but his hard work. You were right, I whispered. People show their real face when they think you have nothing. Tomorrow I would see how much further they would go. And when the time came, I would let the truth speak for itself. Not through words, but through the power of silence and revelation. Because sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't in shouting the truth. It's in watching people realize it too late. The following evening, Priya's family organized a grand dinner at their home. It was meant to be a celebration of the marriage, but from the tone and the sparkle in her mother's eyes, I could tell it was more of a display. Everything gleamed with luxury. Crystal chandeliers, golden plates, the aroma of expensive food, and servants rushing about as if the queen herself were visiting. I arrived early as I always did, wearing the same simple sari that had become my disguise. I could feel the curious glances from the guests, all dressed in shimmering silk and glittering jewelry. Some smiled politely, others whispered softly behind their wine glasses. Priya came to me quickly, her face lighting up with genuine warmth. Ma, I saved you a seat next to me, she said, gently holding my hand. She looked beautiful, and her love for my son shone through her every gesture. Her mother, however, looked less pleased. "Oh, she can sit anywhere," she said casually, waving her hand. "The guests of honor are arriving soon." I nodded and took my seat quietly at the corner of the long dining table. I didn't mind. I wasn't here to eat. I was here to observe. When the dinner began, conversations filled the air. The guests, friends of Priya's parents, began discussing business, property, luxury brands, and international travel. I listened silently, occasionally smiling when someone looked my way. At one point, one of the women leaned closer to Priya's mother and asked, "Is she from your staff?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Her mother laughed awkwardly. "Oh no, she's the boy's mother. You know how some people are, very simple, very traditional." I kept my eyes on my plate, not saying a word. My son looked furious, but I gave him a small shake of my head, silently telling him to stay calm. A few minutes later, her father-in-law raised a toast. "To new beginnings," he said, his voice loud and proud. "May this union bring prosperity and happiness to both families." I smiled faintly. Prosperity, yes, but happiness? That comes only when there's respect. As the evening continued, her mother started boasting about their family's achievements, the properties they owned, the schools her daughters had attended, the foreign trips they had taken. I stayed quiet, though part of me wanted to laugh. She was desperate to prove her worth, while assuming I had none. At one point, a man sitting across from me asked politely, "And what do you do, ma'am?" Her mother jumped in before I could answer. "Oh, she's retired. Simple homemaker, you know. Doesn't really involve herself in business matters." The man nodded, uninterested, and turned away. But I could see my son's face tightening again. I gave him another small smile. "Patience," I reminded him silently. "They will reveal themselves, just wait." After dinner, dessert was served in the garden. The moonlight fell softly over the tables as laughter echoed around. I sat quietly under a tree, away from the crowd, when I overheard Priya's mother speaking to one of her friends. "She's harmless," she said, chuckling. "But honestly, I feel embarrassed sometimes. People will think our daughter married into poverty. Thank God my husband agreed to help them financially. Otherwise, they'd never manage in our circle." Her friend laughed. "You're too kind. I don't know how you accepted such a match." I felt my chest tighten, but not with pain, with disappointment. Not once did she think to ask who I really was or what I had built in my life. She had already decided my worth based on the fabric of my clothes and the simplicity of my words. Priya came over and sat beside me, unaware of what I'd heard. "Ma, are you okay? You've been quiet all night." I smiled gently. "Yes, my dear. Just thinking about how life shows us people's true hearts when we least expect it." She tilted her head. "You sound serious." I patted her hand. No. I'm proud of you, Priya. Truly." She smiled, touched. "I'm lucky to have you." In that moment I saw the purity in her eyes. She was not like her mother. She loved my son genuinely, without conditions. That gave me peace. Before we left, her father approached me. "You're a quiet woman," he said. "Not used to this kind of crowd?" I smiled politely. "I've seen many kinds of crowds, sir. But I prefer silence. It reveals more truth than words." He looked puzzled but said nothing more. As we drove home later, my son finally spoke. "Mother, they humiliated you today. I can't stay silent anymore." I looked out the car window, watching the city lights flicker by. "No, son," I said calmly. "Let them believe what they want. The truth doesn't need defending. It reveals itself at the right time." He glanced at me, confused. "What do you mean?" I smiled faintly. "Let's just say soon they'll understand who they were judging." That night, as I lay awake, I made a decision. I had seen enough. It was time to remove the mask, not in anger but with quiet grace. The next time I visited them, it wouldn't be as the poor and naive mother they thought I was. It would be as myself, the woman who built her life from the ground up, and who didn't need anyone's approval to hold her head high. A week had passed since that dinner, yet the echoes of their laughter and the sting of their words still lingered faintly in the air. I had remained silent, but inside I was preparing. Not for confrontation, but for revelation. My son had grown restless. "Mother, please," he said one evening. "I can't bear how they treat you." Let me tell them who we really are. I smiled calmly. No, son. Not yet. They've built their judgment on assumptions. Let them live in that illusion a little longer. When the truth arrives, it will speak louder than any defense. He nodded reluctantly. He trusted me. Even if he didn't fully understand my plan, the opportunity came sooner than expected. Priya's parents invited us again. This time for a small family gathering at their estate. They mentioned that a few business associates would be joining as well, to discuss an investment project her father was working on. When I heard that, I quietly made a few calls of my own. The day of the gathering arrived. I dressed as always in a simple sari, but this time there was a quiet confidence in the way I carried myself. My son noticed it immediately. You look different today, mother, he said softly. I smiled. Sometimes, confidence is the only jewelry we need. As we entered the mansion, the atmosphere was lively. Guests mingled, laughter filled the room, and Priya's mother was in her usual element, showing off her home, her clothes, her status. When she saw me, her smile tightened slightly. Oh, you're here. How lovely, she said, her tone dripping with false sweetness. Thank you, I replied, calm as ever. Dinner was scheduled after the business discussion. I stayed in the corner quietly observing. Then a man in his 50s walked in, tall, dignified, wearing an elegant suit. The entire room seemed to pause for a moment. Ah, Mr. Mehra, Priya's father exclaimed, hurrying to greet him. You finally made it. Everyone, this is Mr. Rajan Mehra, the owner of Mehra Group, one of the biggest investors in our city. I smiled silently. I knew him very well. Mr. Mehra looked around the room, his gaze settling on me. For a moment, his eyes widened slightly in recognition. Then he smiled. Mrs. Aurora. What a pleasant surprise. It's been years since we last met. The room fell silent. Priya's father turned, startled. You know her? Mr. Mehra laughed heartily. Of course I do. She's one of the most respected entrepreneurs in our industry. Her company partnered with mine 5 years ago. Didn't you know? I could feel every eye in the room turning toward me. Shock, disbelief, confusion. Priya's mother's face went pale. I smiled politely. We've known each other professionally for quite some time, I said softly. Mr. Mehra continued, clearly delighted to see me. I remember when your company donated half its profits to rural education programs. Such generosity is rare these days. And to think you're here as a guest. How wonderful. Priya's father stammered. C company? You own? I looked at him calmly. Yes. My late husband and I built Aurora Enterprises from nothing. It's now managed by a small board, though I still oversee major decisions. Silence. You could almost hear the sound of their pride shattering. Priya looked at me with wide eyes. Ma, you never told us. I smiled gently. Because titles don't define people, Beta. Character does. Her mother tried to speak, but her voice faltered. I didn't realize. I interrupted softly, my tone kind but firm. You didn't need to. That's the beauty of humility. It doesn't need to announce itself. Mr. Mehra laughed warmly. Always so graceful, Mrs. Aurora. Well, this evening just became much more interesting. As the evening went on, the atmosphere shifted completely. The same people who had ignored me before now approached with admiration and respect. Priya's father tried to engage me in conversation about business, but I kept my answers polite and brief. When dinner was served, Priya's mother hesitated before sitting beside me. Her voice trembled. I owe you an apology. I misjudged you terribly. I looked at her, my eyes gentle but unwavering. We all make mistakes. What matters is what we learn from them. Tears welled up in her eyes. She lowered her gaze, ashamed. Later that night, when most of the guests had left, Priya came to me quietly. Ma, you taught me something tonight, she said. That real dignity doesn't come from money. It comes from grace. I held her hand, smiling. And you, my dear, already have that. As we prepared to leave, I looked around one last time. The same walls that had once echoed with whispers and judgment were now filled with silence and respect. When we stepped outside, the night breeze felt lighter. My son walked beside me, his chest proud, his eyes soft. Mother, he said, you didn't raise your voice once, and yet you said everything. I smiled, looking up at the stars. The truth doesn't need volume, son. It just needs the right moment.